So good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this very beautiful event that you organized for today. I'm a project expert here at ESPON, EGTC, and I've been lucky enough to work along and besides the experts of the escape projects. But today I would like to present our ESPON work that was done in the joint cooperation with the Portuguese presidency, and was resulted in the ESPON policy brief for the territorial evidence and policy advice for the prosperous future of rural areas. A brief introduction of ESPON. We are a EU-funded program that is specialized in supporting the cohesion policy. Over 20 years' time, irrespective of our name, we have been maintained our role is inspiring, informing on the way that policies could be improved by looking and giving attention to the territory. ESPON is one of the Interreg programs, and our primary mission is to deliver evidence, data, and territorial advice to our stakeholders and policymakers. ESPON offers a lot of competencies and sees its role in connecting governments, researchers, practitioners, and giving them a meeting place to discuss the most important territorial issues, challenges, trends, or patterns. The evidence and knowledge produced by ESPON aim to support the development and territorial analysis of territorial trends and strategies at different scales, like transnational for micro-regional strategies, sea basins, as well as a functional approach such as cross-border or cross-administrative borders for urban metropolitan strategies. The output and knowledge base developed by ESPON constitute a relevant source of information, which is very much free and very much available for everybody for informing such strategies at EU, national, or regional level. Working towards achieving our mission, ESPON supports the work of every presidency of the Council of the EU. During the first semester of 2021, we identified our niche on how we could provide our best competencies and support the Portuguese presidency throughout its mandate. This is how this joint policy brief was developed, by searching for the path towards a prosperous future of rural areas, discussing the opportunities for both growing and shrinking rural areas. This process was heavily influenced by two ongoing debates at EU level, building the long-term vision for rural areas 2040 and implementing the Territorial Agenda 2030. Aligning to the EC priorities, we have taken the opportunity provided by the Territorial Agenda, and we thought that using its structure, putting priorities into action and advice policies into recommendation could be of better use in bringing the EU political priorities to national or local level, all looking on how to match rural areas' needs and evidence, but also calling on board relevant partners and stakeholders to work on a territorial approach. This is all done under the fact that Territorial Agenda recognizes that the policy responses need to have a strong territorial dimension, but also coordinated approaches, while acknowledging the diversity and the specificities of places. This is where we search our vast evidence collection and knowledge production and try to identify the most new and relevant projects in order to support the policy-making process. For this reason, the policy brief stands on different EU-wide projects results like, of course, ESCAPE, which is dealing with shrinking and demography issues for rural areas, but also on Prophecy project dealing with inner peripheries and access to general service of interest, lies on the territorial quality of life, but also on the Greta project dealing with green infrastructures, or on Titan measuring territorial vulnerabilities in face of hazards. Nonetheless, it also lies on the technological transformation and transitioning of regional economies. But going beyond this general framework, we had to explore the territorial diversity that exists in the European space, diversity created by the variety of paths taken towards its development. As a relevant indicator, both for territory and societal trends. Demography remains essential in building a potential baseline scenario for the sustainable development of all rural areas. When looking at demographic trends of rural regions, clear distinctions can be made. Some regions will be accumulating population and some others will be depleting or shrinking. Evidence from ESCAPE project suggests that these dynamics are the results of long-standing trends. And looking at past and future demographic, it is expected that the share of population living in rural areas to decrease from 36% from 1993 to 29% in 2033. Well, this is happening since the 60s, as many local administrative units, especially in East, Central, and Southern Europe, have experienced prolonged periods of population decrease. A situation that should be acknowledged, such as it is. As my colleague Gergely mentioned, we based our policy brief on the main findings of ESCAPE, and we looked at understanding the drivers behind rural shrinkage, as these are driven by more complex socioeconomic and spatial transformation. I won't reiterate, but this has been a very important premise for developing our policy brief. We tried to understand that these all processes are medium to long term and maybe ameliorated by tailored rural policies. Examining the processes that influence the wider rural economy and society. We also looked at the vicious cycles of decline that tend to self-perpetuate, and these are linked to accessing services of general interest, composition of labor market, and general vitality, lack of young people, as these are very influential in creating and developing the right policy responses. After understanding the broader context depicted by ESPON evidence, we then searched for policy responses for the long-term development, looking at the distinct territorial dimensions under the Territorial Agenda framework. Placed under the Green and Just Europe objectives, the action-oriented framework should promote equal opportunities and include access to public services for people and businesses wherever they are located. The place-based approach linked to the cross-cutting domains could significantly increase the coherence and effectiveness of policy responses, while it is clear that some of these responses will need to be tailored for some specific territorial needs. So against this background, some of the ESPON policy recommendations could be listed. For the Just Europe that offers perspective for all people and places. As shrinking regions face more complex development challenges than the population, going for a territorial sensitive approach is to be desired. Identifying which policy options would work best for rural regions. The one-size-fits-all policy approach does not account for rural heterogeneity, but a multi-rural policy concept might. So building on the ESCAPE clustering under the balanced Europe and functional regions objective, the following policy responses could be highlighted. Discover and develop a comparative advantage by encouraging investments in local assets in order to help lower migration and boost attractiveness. Capitalize on opportunities that arise as a result of proximities to cities or urban areas, improving urban-rural relations and interactions, strengthen weak secondary and tertiary sectors using financial support from the EU in order to create a more diversified labor market, but also change the focus from mitigating rural shrinkage to smart adaptation. Design interventions using local knowledge, coordinated policy response across ministries and key sectors. build a storyline around positive notions of rural transition, transformation, restructuring, innovation, or even smart adaptation, building a terminology that promotes positive images of rural life. Also, nonetheless, consolidate and develop the concept of functional rural areas as an effective tool for tackling challenges at a more appropriate territorial scale. Addressing the issue of quality of life goes beyond good service provision or accessibility, and the Quality of Life project discovered that, highlighted that this encompasses 3 spheres: personal, socio-economic, and ecological. Understanding the perceptions of quality of life at local scale could help the authorities to directly address the needs of the residents, as rural communities are usually better socially connected. From this perspective, under the healthy environment objective, some possible policy responses could be highlighted as well, like shift local strategies to a citizen-centric approach, promoting new deliberative processes that focus directly on enhancing the quality of life aspects, improve quality of life, ensuring attractive living environments, create opportunities that the residents can benefit from, but also enhance the attractiveness of rural areas for new businesses or innovators, like enabling them to act like influencers or ambassadors, providing them enough resources and appropriate connections. Using the green infrastructure as a response to climate change and reduce the effect of natural hazards could also be a practical solution for creating place-based policies. From this perspective, deploying the potential of green infrastructure in strategies within a geostrategic climate change approach should be implemented through capitalizing the potential that rural areas have by enabling them to become successful laboratories for this, but also looking at the potential that shrinking rural areas may have, as they are to be incentivized in their role as carbon sinks and renewable energy sources. Again, we turn to the service of general interest, which is a really important topic in relation to rural areas. And adequate provision and access to the SGIs is not only an indicator of the degree of the territorial connectiveness, but also an indicator of quality of life. Throughout Europe, there are still many areas that have relatively poor conditions and appear as inner peripheries in regard to accessing several SGIs. Policy response should aim to improve access, to enable provision and comparable access to services, understanding that demographic change is about people and their life. Possible forms of intervention to match the inner periphery's territorial characteristic will need to focus on innovations in service delivery, and under the healthy environment objective, it could use new technologies to overcome the geographical distance, like telemedicine or online administration. Also intensifying schemes that establish social, economical, digital service delivery alternatives. Redesigning the delivery responsibility of certain services should also try to incorporate social innovative models, transferring responsibility to private parties. Elaborate place-specific strategies, accentuating special restructuring so that services can be accessed or brought to place where they are already unavailable or are on the verge of becoming unavailable. Encouraging population retention by enhancing existing built environment and local facilities designed to increase well-being. Past EU policies have focused on promoting rural economic development while offering tools for supporting the growth-oriented but agriculturally focused initiatives. The high share of agriculture is usually associated with lower salaries, more demanding working conditions, becoming one of the underlying causes of shrinkage. Recent strategies such as European Green Deal, the farm to fork strategy, or the biodiversity strategy involve rethinking the role of rural areas, looking at them from a climate change and biodiversity point of view. So under the circular economy objective, one policy response could be highlighted, namely rebooting the agricultural sector through sustainable and optimized supply chains and ecosystem services. Meaning to reassess the supply chains from production to distribution, focusing on the sustainable and optimized delivery system for locally sourced produces. Invest in creating sustainable and efficient agricultural processes. This will contribute to improving productivity indicators, but also to create new high-paid jobs and bring economic diversification. Last but not least, the technological industrial transformation, which has already begun, has led to regions having to cope with additional socioeconomic transformations. Policies at all levels will have to support these adaptations sooner than later. So with that, new technologies could play an important role for securing a prosperous future for rural areas. From this perspective, under the Sustainable Connections objective, enhancing economic specialization, diversification, and innovation based on local potential and initiatives could mean that we should capitalize on local knowledge, as rural areas are also repositories of local innovation. Design tailored policies to especially support lagging and shrinking regions in becoming new islands of innovation for both traditional sectors such as agriculture and enable smart specialization for new sectors. Support the efficient uptake of new technologies and ensure a rapid technological transfer, connecting through a top-down approach public and private institutions. Also, we were looking at adopting and implementing 4.0 technologies and as solutions to overcome ongoing labor shortages, but also maintaining a balance between technological innovation and attracting new workforce. During several meetings where the policy brief was discussed, I should mention that developing this policy brief took around 6 months. We were asked to provide some recommendations on good governance as well, extracting them from our policy responses. From this perspective, some of the following could be highlighted: ensuring strategic and innovative capacity for policymaking at national level, building on best practices, but also create the right frameworks for multi-level governance and enhance territorial cooperation, which is still the most efficient tool in overcoming all the challenges that rural areas face. Support regional intermunicipal cooperation or public-private coalitions, or enhance the role of civil society and NGOs in local initiatives or projects for scaling up and ensuring greater efficiencies on long-term implementation. In this policy paper, demography and place-sensitive policy actions emerge as drivers for a long-term vision. In addition to aligning with Territorial Agenda principles and priorities, the 11 ESPON recommendations intend to support the shift in the focus of the rural areas onto people and places, going a bit beyond economic development or economic development. As long-term development itself requires solid, mature enhancement of living standards and investment in building social trust. The long-term vision for rural areas recognizes resilience and the lessons to be learned from the existing functional rural networks that implicitly contribute to territorial cohesion, but also combining them with those successful experiences of urban networks. I would like to mention in the end that what was interesting for this policy brief development was the whole process, not only the results, as this policy brief was discussed during several meetings for the territorial agenda, but also within interministerial meetings for the Portuguese or for the national territorial contact for cohesion points. So different layers of inputs and discussions were added on top of our evidence, enabling us to deliver the most pertinent and the most, should I say, relevant in connection, the most relevant conclusions and recommendations in connection to the needs expressed at the various level, be it EU or national or even regional. So for more information, I would like to invite you to explore our dedicated webpage, which is ESPON EU Rural, where you will find the long version and the short version of the policy brief. We have two versions for that, but it is in English. I thank you very much, and for any questions, I am here at your disposal.